Welcome to What's Left, a weekly political discussion challenging the mainstream left. We are online at what-s-left.webnode.com. You can find a link to our blog in the episode notes. Please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications, and share your favorite episode with someone you know. My name is Andy Lipson. I'm a teacher and socialist here in Oakland. And again, we are joined by socialist and community organizer Kenny Zepeda and fellow What's Left member Jessica, a school teacher, college professor in the Pacific Northwest. And you will see that Eduardo is not here, and we expected him to be here today, but looks like he's still in Mexico. Eduardo's return was delayed in Mexico, has been delayed another week, so we expect him back next week. So he is coming back, believe it or not, folks. And when he does come back, it's going to be the four of us from then on, not just the three of us, because Jessica, once she got on, refused to leave.
Yeah, very stubborn like that.
Well, I'm really glad you're joining us, Jessica, and I'm looking forward to the four of us doing this. So today, actually, another episode brought to you by Kenny. He was talking to me about how the mandates were being lifted in England, right, or in Great Britain or something, right?
Well, COVID restrictions, as far as I know.
Okay, right. Let's be clear about that.
Euphemisms being floated around, I think.
Right, and a similar trend has been going on around in this country, in the United States. You could say in Canada to some extent. And so I think we were going to discuss like the extent of that and what do we think it all means. Does it mean the resistance is pushing back? Does it mean the plan is receding to some extent, maybe coming on a different front? What do we think it means? So that's what we're going to try to discuss today.
And for me, quite honestly, too, you have to be honest with your theory, right? Like we've been claiming, right, like this is about the fourth industrial revolution. This is about digital identity, data extraction, profiteering from all this social control. And so for me, when I first heard this news in the UK, right, or England specifically, I took a pause and I wondered what was happening. Like, is this a new strategy? What are they actually saying? Because again, they're taking COVID restrictions back. So basically, they're not. If you test positive for COVID, you don't have to self-isolate. And if you listen to the speech given by Boris Johnson, he even talks about basically associates it a bit to the flu, in saying that what he's asking for is basically common courtesy rules that apply to the flu. Like if you feel sick, like you shouldn't be around people, right? And then maybe you should stay home. But like they also are talking about stopping testing or funding testing. That was a major part of that speech, that they were saying that the cost of testing has been massive, and that there is some debate on that, and that according to the science, it's a good time to take the restrictions back. Omi-Con hasn't been as deadly, according to them. And also, essentially what I noticed from that speech was that they were talking about focus protection, the Great Barrington Declaration, what was proposed at the beginning of all this by that set of scientists that were actually blacklisted or dismissed, and called inhumane in many ways, because they were going to cause massive deaths. And so what Johnson is saying, that the new plan should be about focusing testing and vaccination and treatments on the vulnerable. And that was essentially, to my understanding, what the Great Barrington Declaration was, at the beginning of COVID, was proposing. And so that's why I find it interesting that there is a switch, but there is also a critique from the left, actually, that about these steps, and as irresponsible and other things that we'll probably get into. But I guess that's the essence of what's happening. They're lifting mask mandates in some places, even though some majors are deciding to keep some mandates in public transportation, like the recommendations. They're shifting the language from requiring it and being punishable by law, fines, to recommending these mask wearing, for example, and self-isolation. And also, they're no longer paying for people to self-isolate because, according to them, it's too expensive. And so this is my understanding of what has happened. And so that's where, I brought it up to the group to see what you guys make of it. How does it relate to what we've been discussing here about the fourth industrial revolution, about, digital passes, IDs, because even Boris Johnson said that they're recommending that venues stop using the National Health Services COVID pass. So that was another step that they took. They're not requiring it, right? But things are shifting from requirement to recommendations.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to keep up with so many different countries and regions and states and stuff. But I do think, it seems like where I am, there is going to be some lifting. It hasn't happened yet, but they're saying late March. I think, I do feel it's important to say, a lot of us have very rightly so grown very jaded over the past 2 years. And I hear a lot of people, kind of in our movement saying this doesn't mean anything, everything's still going to go right ahead. And to a large degree, I agree. I think a lot of the stuff, like the fourth industrial revolution stuff, like you mentioned, Kenny, is continuing to go full steam ahead. Yeah, okay, there's some lifting of vaccine mandates, mask mandates, right? But AI is going forward, blockchain's going forward, social impact investing is going forward, 5G, all of it, right? Like a lot of this stuff we talked about with Allison last week. But I do think it's important just to acknowledge that, say mask mandate being lifted in a school for whatever reason is a good thing. It may be a small victory in the grand scheme of things, but I think it's okay to celebrate that. Yeah, so we'll see. I'm very skeptical, especially here in the United States. It sounds like state mandates are going to be lifted, at least for the time being, but that doesn't mean that institutions, schools, healthcare facilities can't implement these restrictions themselves. And based on everything we've seen the last 2 years, especially in large urban liberal centers, I fully expect that they will, not only that they will, but that it will be applauded, and that even in places maybe where masks are not required anymore, at least for the time being, that it will be applauded to sort of do it anyway. I think in a lot of contexts, I'll be really interested to see faculty, for instance, at my institution, kind of what their response is if it does get lifted in a month or so. But the infrastructure's all there now. Biden extended the state of emergency this week for another year. I fear, that at any point they can just snap right back into it with COVID, or it'll be another crisis. But yeah, I definitely don't feel like jumping up and down celebrating, just because I think they've been so successful in laying out the infrastructure, and also just we know now that a significant portion of the population, like in the US and populations in the West at large, are more than willing to it's clear that they're utterly captured, that they're utterly willing to submit to and celebrate their own subjugation at any time. And that's a really disturbing fact, yeah, I'll stop there.
What I think Kenny was mentioning when he mentioned the left response to this, not the what's left response, the left, this crazy left that has been in favor of lockdowns and vaccinations and mass vaccinations and masking and all that kind of stuff. My understanding of much of the left's response to the state lifting up some of these measures has been, they're trying to kill us. What are you doing? Like, you got to keep these in place. Okay, so that's nuts. And I think the question then comes, what's what you said, Jessica, like, well, should we, is the state lifting these something to celebrate? I'm not so sure. Rather, here's what I think is going on. But first, I want to talk about California, because there was an article in the San Francisco Chronicle. What day was it? It was middle of February, about a week ago. California adopts nation's first endemic virus policy. And California is basically looking at this endemic policy as sort of a plan for the rest of the country. But we're going to start first, right? Because we're such a model state. And as it relates to pushing COVID stuff, we are. New York State and California State are. And what does it mean? Well, it does mean that mask mandates come up in the middle of the month or something like that, lifting the state's indoor masking requirements, or an announcement coming in February. So that should have happened already, right? Wednesday, we're going to do it this Wednesday. That's today. Actually, they're going to lift the state's indoor masking requirements today. An announcement coming February 28th of when precisely school children can stop wearing face coverings. All right. The plan, though, the way they're talking about it, the milestone nearly 2 years in the making, the milestone being this endemic plan, envisions a return to a more normal existence with the help of a variety of initiatives and billions in new spending to more quickly spot surges of variants, add healthcare workers, stockpile tests, and push back against false claims and other misinformation. The plan is officially called an acronym SMARTER. Let me see if I can get that. SMARTER. Okay. The letter stands for shots, masks, awareness, readiness, testing, education, and RX, a reference to improved treatments for COVID-19. So that's the plan. And so clearly, they're not talking about this stuff going away, even as they lift it. And I will say that when the Canadian truckers were occupying Ottawa, and there was a person one of the Ottawan politicians who had come out hard and saying, we're going to keep masking, we're going to keep doing all this stuff. Like a week later, just literally was saying the opposite. That's one thing, in response to resistance. What I see happening, I don't see it as in response to resistance. Of course, there is resistance. There is. But what I see it as is training your dog. And when you train your dog, you don't keep it on a leash and you don't keep the leash tight the whole time. You hold the leash, you get it to do what it does. You put the treats where you want to put the treats, and you put the lash where you want to do the lash, and you keep them tight and you train them to do what they do. But at some point, you do want to get them off the leash and see if they run beyond where you told them. You want to see how they behave. So that's what I see happening here. This is the ruling class essentially seeing how much, and also to maintain the narrative, the fiction that this is all related to health requirements. Okay, we'll lift some of this stuff. They already know that a section of the population is going to go, the section of the business are going to still impose it. And then now they get to see, what did all this training produce? And they get to see what all this training produced in the context of a much sicker, I would believe, a much sicker population who is going to be more vulnerable to future whatevers. Largely because not largely. Another reason they're going to be sick is because of these goddamn shots and boosters and the shots that keep coming. So I will say that California is still talking that a lot of the, we have legislation still saying everyone's got to be vaccinated, particularly the employees, school teachers and private and public employees of all sorts here in California. This isn't just about shots. This isn't just about mandates. And it is meaningful for them to say, hey, we're releasing a digital plan like they are in Britain. But I think what they've been counting on are businesses putting together their own plan of how they're going to monitor their employees and how they're going to monitor their customers. And just like we talked about public-private partnerships, just like we talk about fascism as being the fusion of the state and corporations, I think the U.S. state is going to relent a little bit and allow corporate America to do some of the work for them, and corporate America with the support of liberals, with the support of a lot of the population that has unfortunately fallen for the fear, at least in this country. So I don't look at this. I don't actually welcome what's happening right now, because I unfortunately feel like it's just another training. It's another training for us of we have to go back into our holes when the state tells us to go back in the holes, and we can come out of our holes when the state tells us it's safe to come out of our holes. That is not a good situation. And I fear that that while I don't want to wear a mask, and if it makes it less likely I wear a mask, personally, I'll probably be like, okay, that's a little easier. But the noose is still around our neck, and it's actually, I would say, it's still being crafted so that it can really be tightened whenever they need to.
And to that point, again, just going back a little bit to the UK, right, and Boris Johnson, because he's like the first like nation, right, major nation that makes this statement. He, within his speech, he actually makes it clear COVID is not over, or the pandemic is not over, and we're keeping our scientists at the ready for future variants that could be worse. And they don't specify worse, right? They just like, by worse they mean infections, because that, right, like the narrative changed from being deadly to infections, and like in that way they did give us some leash, right, for us to be afraid ourselves and enforce it ourselves. And to that point that you were saying, Lipson, I've experienced that personally, like on my current job. Like the business owners have always gone further than even the CDC or the city beyond their recommendations or policies, and so in terms of how much social distancing we need to happen, when we take our mask off, like the mask mandate was lifted like last week for us. We're still wearing a mask because that's our bosses always go 2 weeks behind whatever the city, because they want to keep an eye on the numbers and stuff to make sure that the CDC or the public officials are correct. So there is a level of mistrust, not in like opposing them, but in that they're not doing a good enough job in protecting us. That's the narrative that I think has been unleashed, and that a lot of people that are kind of psychotic about this are pushing. And like, again, like that's what happens in my job. We're always taking measures that are just beyond any logical, even within the narrative that they've constructed. They go beyond any logical sense, and so yeah, like even in this city, I was talking to you before the show that in San Francisco, there is no real enforcement. There is no real like fines or this or that I've heard of about in the industry, in the restaurant industry that I work at. Bars have been packed, in so many situations, and the people enforcing this are the businesses, like just like you said, and that dictatorship that we talk about, right? They're the ones who make the decision, not the workers. And even though the workers themselves feel some sort of protection by these policies that go beyond, that ask for vaccination for indoors, even though like Omi-Con should have put a hole into that theory, but there is no logic to that. And so again, the fear has been unleashed, the fear of being punished, right, in some ways, or being like not being able to fend for ourselves, right, without the protection of our captors. And so that's why I like the analogy that you say. And but that's the magic of this moment. Is that really, there's no real enforcement. It's just the narrative has been constructed to imprison us, and you can't question that, because like you said, Lipson, the left, whatever that is, they themselves are asking for it. Like I was reading the World Socialist website comment in response to Boris Johnson, and I want to read the first paragraph. This is in January 20th. Like they had already announced that they were going to lift them, all restrictions by this time, whatever. This is the very first paragraph of an article called UK Johnson's Ending of COVID Restrictions Backed by Labour Party and Trade Unions. And this is the first paragraph. The announcement ending all COVID restrictions is the most nakedly criminal action carried out by the Conservative government since the beginning of the pandemic. So, they're pulling the restrictions, like, the thing that also has destroyed many lives, right, of many people, has created many difficulties in so many levels, even within their narrative again. After the wave of Omi-Con, right, like that, where are the dead bodies? Even after all that, they're calling this a criminal act, and so they're calling for us to stay in that world for whenever. They even scoff at the idea of herd immunity. So what is the plan then? To perpetually live in this, condition, in this leash? So they're asking for the leash to stay tight, like you said. And so it's just insane. These are the people that are supposed to be questioning. And then they go on to cite, the number of deaths. 135 children have died, they said. And 175,000 people, I think, in the UK, even though there was actually a Freedom of Information Act that came out reporting that the deaths have been grossly overstated in the UK. And so they don't look at this. They're just trying to, again, play the partisan side and asking for, again, the people we're supposed to be fighting to rule us, govern us, decide for us. And so it's just insane. And even today, I went to IKEA, actually, with my family in California, right? And they changed their policy, right? It now says that fully vaccinated individuals can't take their mask off. It is recommended that they wear it. There's no one enforcing it, but 97% of people were wearing a fucking mask. My brother was the first one to take it off. Even I hesitated. Like that, they've gotten into my head that way. It's like, because I'm afraid of being, and I look that weird, right? Like, because, I'm defying everyone else. So what do they feel, right? Like I'm being watched. So even I fucking hesitated that I'm fighting this shit, right? Like, and I know, like, to a degree, the lies and what, the contradictions. And so they've already unleashed the virus. The virus is not COVID is not a pulmonary shit. It's in our brains. And so that's my point for now.
Yeah, I mean, where I am, like, I went to the gym the other day, and I think it was the first time, and people are pretty lax, and the gym is probably the place where it's the most lax in terms of mask wearing and mask enforcement. But it was the first time I'd gone, and it was pretty busy, and I don't think there was a single person wearing a mask, even though we still have a mask mandate in place. And a lot of times people will be wearing them, but they wear them on their chins or like on their wrist or whatever. But pretty much everyone had like no mask on anywhere, even improperly. And I know like several of the local businesses here where workers have kind of lackadaisically been wearing masks because it's technically required. Like I went to get coffee the other day, and the barista mentioned that they don't have to wear masks anymore. And I was like, oh, that's great. Like, I'm so happy for you. Like, is that because of the state lifting? And she was like, yeah, well, it's not technically supposed to happen till March 31st, but our boss said, like, because they've already announced that it's happening, like, just go for it. So it's just like, I mean, it's just such a contrast from San Francisco, and definitely such a contrast from Seattle. But I also wanted to share, so my friend sent me an article. She's in Seattle, and her children have been having to mask in school like this whole time. And this is the polar opposite, like exactly what you were describing, Kenny, except in a school setting of, like, you know, people just begging for above and beyond what's even being asked for. So I guess students in Seattle, this is in the Mercer area, I think, have formed a Seattle student union. And so one of the students was interviewed, and he said, right now, it does not make any sense to lift the mask mandate, said Miles Hagapian, a 7th grader at Mercer International Middle School. Another variant could pop up, and we should try as hard as we can to limit the spread, especially at schools where you have so many different kids in one place. Miles, who is a member of the Seattle Student Union, a group of Seattle students leading organizing efforts, said he wouldn't feel safe in crowded hallways without masks. Students are currently planning to take action if Seattle schools chooses not to extend mask wearing in schools. This will especially affect BIPOC students just because of access to vaccines and N95 masks, as we have already seen, said Hagapian, referring to Black, Indigenous, and people of color. So I fear, especially in the education space, that this is what a lot of us are going to be encountering. Like, I think we've talked about it. I think Andy, maybe you brought it up last week or the week before about, you know, students like demanding it, teachers demanding it. I'm very worried, like not so much for where I am at my institution. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see if they do lift it, like in line with like the county and the state. But I think in, you know, large cities on the coasts, there's going to be a lot of pressure, like from students themselves. 7th graders. I mean,
Well, I want to say something about that this might be. So I think his name is pronounced Hagopian. And I think
I have no idea how it's pronounced.
I think he's the son of Jesse Hagopian. And I think
Jesse, yeah.
Yes. And Jesse Hagopian is a former member of the ISO. He was a major guy in the ISO, a teacher, person of color. And I know, I don't have to, like, I know what his line is. His line is World Socialist website line. And I'm not going to say that Miles Hagopian, but basically what you can see there is the effect of the revolutionary left on people and on the movement, like literally directly, okay? From Jesse Hagopian to Miles Hagopian to the news to spreading the idea that all these students don't want to be masked. Now, of course, we know that there are parents and students. And in fact, I saw a 36-second clip of young kids who are being told, we're not going to wear masks tomorrow. And they're all jumping up and down, right?
Yeah.
You know, we see that as well. And look, it's a mix. It depends where you are. But until there is a collective fight, I'm not going to know what to make of what's actually in the United States other than a grab bag of opposition and support. And I think I happen to be centered in Seattle as a center, San Francisco as a center. I think Oakland is a center. California, by and large, the urban centers are centers of not just capitulation to state control, but begging and, in fact, insisting on more state control by our rulers, and led by the revolutionary left and the liberal left and the establishment left in those regions. Or led meaning they cheer on that kind of crap. So that's the first thing. The second thing comes to mind is, if I understand it right, some of these mask liftings are, if you're vaccinated, you can take off your mask, right?
Are they? Like, is that specified? Because
go ahead, Kenny. I'm not shy.
At least to my understanding, in San Francisco, from what I saw in IKEA, from what I hear at work, it is that contingency. And so, but there is, again, no real enforcement. It's based on like shaming.
Yes, but the very statement of that, without any opposition, is a defeat for us, because if you accept it but don't fight it, if you will, then you accept that, okay, well, I'm not vaccinated, I'm not vaccinated, can I wear my mask? These sorts of questions. And then it opens up the state when they want to come in and say, well, there's an outbreak happening. Are you doing masking properly? Like, have you checked all your unvaccinated people to see if they're wearing a mask compared? Like, by accepting that whole thing, it creates, in places where there is complete mind fuckery and everyone's lost their mind, it creates a situation that jobs are basically like, well, you're not vaxxed, so you should wear a mask, and you are vaxxed, so you shouldn't. It creates that sort of visual divide. So it does all sorts of wonderful things for the ruling class that allows them to visualize in real time what their situation is. Not just visualize how much obedience we have, but literally visualize the compliance with the vaccination, even without their QR code. Because look, this is going to come down to facial recognition software, coming down to the things that this is it's all coming. So they're going to have, at a later date, a situation where they can actually enforce. Sorry, you're not vaccinated. We scanned your face. We see that you're walking into this place without it. There's, you get a bump, you get a hit, social credit score lowered, or alarm goes off, or some buzzer goes off. So this is all the future.
They're not even going to need to do that yet. Like, people who are like following the rules, if you're unvaxxed and that's visible by you're wearing a mask, like, you're automatically going to be a pariah.
Right. But if you're not wearing a mask, right? That's what I'm saying. Like,
yeah.
So all that stuff. But yes. And then I want to bring up the situation in my own school, which my administration does not support, as far as I can tell, vaccinations and the testing and da-da-da-da. So our staff, which is, they met some of them, the ones who were biggest of the mask, were like asking, when the thing lifts, are we going to not have to wear masks? Because if you're vaccinated, you shouldn't have to wear a mask. And our administration's answer was, no, everyone's going to wear a mask. Now, do I know why they gave that answer? But I don't. But I have a suspicion that they're worried about not just the divide within the employees, but the divide within students. So their default is to basically be like, we're just all going to wear our masks. And I actually get it, but in reality, we're all having to wear masks because these motherfucking unvaccinated people aren't with the program. I could breathe properly. You know what I'm saying? Like, so again, and I actually think my administration might be doing the right thing in this regard to try to, but I don't like it. I at this point prefer to be like, let's all just put it on there. Like, I'll wear this goddamn thing that says I'm unvaxxed or whatever, and go in there and do that. And even deal with it student wise. I'm not going to say that's a solution, but part of me just says, let's be done with this nonsense of pretend. So I just think there's lots of hidden landmines in all of this that are really, that benefit the state, benefit their web of control that they are both trying to build and assess. And all of this is going to allow them to know, can they take them? Are they ready to take those next steps? So that's what I see. And for me, I have no doubt that any of these retreats, so-called retreats, are very much part of building the fourth industrial revolution that they are going forward into.
Just on, I feel like we're maybe fixated on the mask stuff, but just another example of an indication that this is not temporary. So I don't know if this is happening in California, but in Oregon, even as the past few weeks or months, they've started to indicate that they are going to lift the statewide mask mandate. They have at the same time moved to legislate permanent required masking. I think just in schools and healthcare facilities, and I think it might also be vaccine mandates. I'd have to double check that, at least for workers. And so they're saying it's permanent, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's forever, right? But they just want the ability to not have to put through like another set of temporary emergency orders. Like they just want it. And I think it's actually part of the reasoning is it's actually illegal to file like the same temporary rule or like a temporary rule that uses the same language. Like you can't just keep extending it forever. And so they've gone ahead, and it's, I mean, nobody voted, like nobody gets to vote on this stuff. So it's like they're lifting it at the same time as telling us, oh no, it's actually going to be permanent. Like you said, Andy, you're our dog. Like you can go off leash now, but we have the right to put you back on whenever we want.
And can I add two things, Kenny? Number one, safe. So I'll go with a Safeway. I'll go in without my mask. Then a guard might ask, "Hey, you're not wearing your mask." I said, "Yes, I'm not wearing my mask." And then the guard might, or even an employee might say, "Sir, are you vaccinated?" Right. So my answer is none of your business, and that might be enough, right? But that very exchange creates the situation for that employee to say, you know what, I don't want to be having to ask everyone. We need to have a code at the front that lets us know who's in and who's out as it relates to mask and who's mask. So the whole thing is built towards, in my mind, begins to build support for the QR code so that the employee doesn't have to have that messy, or even the facial recognition that sorts it out for us. And so that's number one. Number two, the elections. Elections are coming in November. Democrats are looking in a horrible situation, the establishment. And I can imagine that they would want to lift up a little bit to seem reasonable, to give themselves a possible chance of recovering in November, just in time for the next fall season, which is going to be the next flu season, so they can just bring the hammer down after that. So that's another thing I think about.
Yeah, I think booster 4 or shot 4 will be fall. Like I think it'll be pushed really hard for fall.
I also, again, just stemming from having listened to Boris Johnson, that's who I'm picking on today, that, basically alluding at, but we're ready, saying we're going to be ready for the next one, for the next one that could be worst. And also just the fact that, I also wonder, is there a new vaccine, right, for the new variants coming up? And therefore, like, okay, it doesn't matter if you had the old one, you need the new vaccine in order to protect yourself again. We're back to square one in some way. That's what I'm worried about, because I don't know. Like, I'm curious as to what you two think about, like whether Omicron has kind of weakened the arguments over boosters, because I do think the booster uptake has slowed down in the US. And so that's why I find, if they want to push this narrative, the need for a new vaccine, right, to continue to get people to stay on these systems. Obviously the fear and all that is beneficial, and just the fact that we're policing each other and we're policing ourselves. But again, like, I'm curious as to if you think that is a possibility, or what do you make of the slowing down of the booster, uptake in the US?
Well, it's funny that you say a new vaccine, because I just saw in the New York Times today a new 2-dose COVID vaccine showed, wait for it, 100% efficacy against severe disease, and maybe an effective booster for other shots. The vaccine was made by European companies, Sanofi and GSK, is that GlaxoSmithKline.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a conventional inoculation, so it's not mRNA, which is kind of interesting. So I don't know how quickly that will go through and get authorized, or even if it will. But they're already talking about it. And I wonder if, I don't know how much of the resistance to the booster and just the shots in general is like particular to the mRNA technology. Like that is part of what makes it seem so experimental. So maybe they think they'll have more luck with a quote unquote conventional one.
Yeah, I think there has been there's the 35% of the country which still has not gotten the first shot, if I'm understanding right. And then I do think of that 65% who got the shot, maybe 30 to 35 or 40% of those people got boosted. And that was with that really came from the Omicron push. Like the Omicron push was part of getting the booster thing going. And it just, I do agree with you, Kenny, that it didn't quite materialize in the terrifying way that might have led to more and more people getting more and more of those shots. But the mandates are here. They're going to do mandates. They're doing them at the college level. They're going to carry on with that at the college level. They're going to carry on with doing young people and putting those shots to young people for schools. And so we are aged out of this. Like, this is not for us. We have already been factored out of the future. So if we do it or don't do it, not that they don't care at all, but it's about the future and these future generations getting themselves used to some sort of training. And so that, I think, is well on its way. And I do think there's going to be another round. There's going to be future rounds of sickness and future rounds of the pharmaceutical industry and the state saying, we have a solution to your sickness here. And some of it's going to take the form of, much of it, I do think, is going to take the form of vaccinations. I think a lot of it's going to take the form of experimental things. But I am not optimistic. I mean, the fact that people aren't getting boosted, that's not enough for me. I feel like we need to have a movement that is refusing to carry on in this way and is looking to stop this. And we don't have that. And so that's what, to me, the thing that I'm looking to be part of and to look to see if we can build. Not just people who kind of passively opt out or find a way around it and the state allows it for a time, because the more time we give them, they will come up with something else, and something else will insert itself where they'll just get another push and get us through the hole that we refuse to go through.
I also find it interesting that at least the narrative out of the UK is that this thing has been costly, right? For the first time, they're looking at cost and because again, at least from the left, there is a complete lack of understanding of the financial aspects of it, right? Like we've talked about Fabio Vighi. I've been listening to his stuff, reading his stuff, and he makes an argument of why the world has had to be brought to a standstill, right? Like the lockdowns. Mm-hmm. And he makes an association to he makes a connection to the financial issues happening in 2019, repo market issues, potentially creating some massive economic event, worldwide. People also forget that Brexit was a thing, right? Before COVID, it was a massive thing. And that was going to cost a lot of money and stuff. And so in this process, like one thing that has been completely lost, I think, is that from the left, from the people that are supposed to have an analysis of what's happening, is that there has been a massive funneling of money into markets. So that I find it funny and like bold that, this leader, right, of the United Kingdom comes and says that this is about cost in a big part, when in fact, there's been a lot of money spent, funneled into assuring the markets. If you really look into, where the money has been gone, like if people are actually listening, that's what it's a little infuriating and scary, right? Like people on the left, there's no attention to this. There's no attention to the fact that billionaires have doubled their wealth during this period, right? the argument still goes that this is capitalism just trying to kill people. Is that superficial analysis? I guess that's what I'm bringing attention to. That's why, yes, of course, so the mandates and the lack of resistance to that. It's just that there is like little to no voices, like in challenging it in a big way. There is no traction to any of those arguments. There is no other argument beyond they're trying to kill people. Capitalism kills people, and that's all there is to to challenge this system. And that's why we end up with those narratives, right? Like teachers saying this is about safe conditions, right? Like they're going to battle with people who want to withdraw these restrictions. They're going to battle because, again, it's just about safety, and that's why it's so scary. How do we come out of this? I don't know how to shift that conversation, right? Because like even like the death toll is not challenged, right? We know that there is evidence, there's hard evidence in the UK that the death toll was overstated, right? And is in the US too, but there is no questioning of that. Because for me, that is like the Big Bang, right? Like that's like what really like fundamentally holds this shit together. The fact that they claim that so many people have died, and that doesn't get challenged at all. Like I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on that. If that is a possible way, to kind of get people or more people out of this spell, and if it's at all possible, because I just don't see at this point, like how else can you rationalize anything if people are still scared to die from this?
Well, I think it's interesting you bring up the expense issue that Boris Johnson. I didn't listen. I've been just followed this. What Gavin Newsom is talking about, sparing no expense for this smarter plan. Like, so they're not talking about it being too expensive, and it isn't too expensive. It's cheap for them. What it's allowed them to do in terms of shove money into the economy and force it up towards the wealthiest capitalists and allow them to amass themselves, smash middle-class businesses. And again, the big companies can buy all that. What they were able to do and they were able to have a capitalist crisis out of which the biggest capitalists could survive in 2020 and beyond. And we don't even call it a crisis of capitalism, just like they did in 2008. Like we at least know that in 2008, there was a economic crisis. We don't know that happened. This is like invisible. It's like they got to have a free crisis, a free war on the working class, out of which that's how you recover from a crisis. You must make war on the working class to recover profitability and then move on to the next, cycle. So that was like a bonanza for them. So there's no cost for them. And I certainly that's true for the US ruling class. I wonder on the European ruling class, because I sometimes wonder how much they're caught in the game of, in my opinion, of this notion of big player like the US and China, who I think are really running the show in terms of forcing a global dynamic in play, in my opinion, because it's a competition for data collection and building AI and things like that. That's my opinion. So that's number one. So the other thing I would say is, let's remember that in the context of this relieving of like, oh, mask and this, the Department of Homeland Security just came out with like, if you say anything bad about COVID, you're malinformation, misinformation, disinformation, terrorism. Like they're literally pushing forward on an attack on people challenging so there's no relief. Like the state is strengthening itself and actually positioning itself for a tighter grip in the context of, quote, relieving itself. So I think that for me, first of all, I don't know how to reach people who are like got their minds over there. But all I can say is I attempt to say that if you're scared of COVID, then you're not paying attention to the real enemy and the real thing that's coming after you, which is the state. And that really is the debate actually that exists, which is the debate for people is like, what should we fear, this virus or the institutions that are telling us about this virus? And in my opinion, that's what they've been able. this is how they've been able to make it all a right-wing thing. The right has been more clear, at least, about the problems of the state, as it don't take my guns, don't try to tell me what to do, and things like that. And the left has been way weak on that shit. And so if you oppose the state right now, you are now synonymous with the right wing. You are synonymous with white supremacy. You are synonymous with fascism. And this is and January 6 people who want to like insurrect and who brought that insurrection to Ottawa. And thank God Trudeau, tried to freeze their bank accounts and get them out of Ottawa. And, oh, isn't he so nice for lifting that now? So I would say all this, smashing and lifting, it's just this. I mean, I don't know. I think you get my point.
Yeah, I mean, just the past few days or over the weekend, right? I mean, they came down hard on those people in Ottawa. I guess it's going to be interesting to see. I know there's a few convoys organizing or attempting to organize in the US. I don't know. I've heard some mixed things about the leadership there and what's happening. But I mean, just in terms of threat from the state, I mean, we have like the most militarized police in the world. Like, it's terrifying. And like you said, Andy, all the infrastructure, all the legislation is already there to persecute whoever they want to persecute. And you won't even have to like be at a protest. Like, you could just post something on Facebook, right? I mean, that's already starting to happen to a degree. I know like Whitney Webb's written a lot about, like pre-crime and especially related to like your digital presence. So yeah, I mean, that's really, really disturbing. On the money thing, I mean, yeah, it's just shocking to me how many people, especially people who are not part of the ruling class, like, are still unwilling to admit that it's class warfare. I don't know, like, you say that in some iteration and the conversation just shuts down. Like, they just don't. I don't know what it is. I mean, the propaganda is so blatant. The numbers are so absurd. I don't know how people can't see it at this point. But yeah, I mean, we saw like the largest transfer of wealth in modern history happen. And yeah, they're dropping a few mandates for now, but are they going to give that money back? Like, to the small businesses that were crushed, to the families who lost kids to overdoses, depression, whatever, suicide. I mean, like, we're just going to let it slide. Like, oh yeah, well, that was COVID, right? A lot of people suffered, but people died. So we had to do it. Yeah, it's just wild.
That's why it's so interesting. Like, at my job, my boss, he like the business might close, at some point, because it's not good. It's a small business, by no means, it's highly capitalized. It's a very small business. And so he said this like the other day, that if our business closes, I will forever be thankful for the PPP loans. They kept us afloat a little longer. And so, that's the level of fucked up, that people are in the mind, right? Like, the inability to see that your business was literally crushed in favor of these fuckers who actually got most of the money, right? That you're thanking them for,
Mm-hmm.
And so, and then he's also the person that executes the most policing of COVID protocols and stuff, in his own life. Like, he doesn't socialize. He's so crazy about this stuff, and paranoid. And so it's just, again, that's what I asked earlier. How does this, like, there is no making sense of anything for people. Like for the people who are stuck in that narrative, you know, of being allowed to take your mask off, or being allowed to go places, you know, being allowed to see your family members, you know, that's why I don't know. Like I'm at this point, it's like, because I know that just as a small group can do shit. It has to grow. There has to be more people making sense of things. You know, like we can create, resist, whatever, but they will come after us. We've talked about that in another episode. They will crush small resistance. You know, this has to be reach critical mass. You know, the whatever convoy is coming, they already have the National Guard in Washington. You know, they do that. That's the world we live in, right? Like, remember, like that's what Fabio Viggi talks about, like the ending of the liberal democracy. You know, that we're going back to like a feudal order. You know, where it's ruled by force. You know, and just bow down to your lords. You know, who and look at the masses of landless peasants. That's who I am. I can't afford a house here. I'm a fucking restaurant manager. I should have been able to afford my own place. I can't. I can never. I constantly talk to my partner, you know, about it. We can never afford a house. You know, we're two working adults with decent jobs, and you know that's the condition we're in. And then we're thanking the people who are subjugating us. You know, who are robbing the house. You know, blind and laughing in our face, and you know, there is no. And then again, we have people who are getting crushed, thanking them, like my boss. And you know, and also, like, I remember at the time they were giving the PPE loans and the conversations were happening. It's like, no, but you know, basically making the argument, no, they have to really like support the job creators, the big corporations. I mean, there is no logic. And again, this person has like a master's in fucking philosophy. You know,
never a good sign.
What's that?
I said that's never a good sign.
You know, I didn't know. I guess I'm finding out. But it's just, but in general, it's just, you know, and I think back at like my friends who are in science. You know, like a person who is a biologist who works in like making drugs, genetics shit. And he, like, I have the evidence, the bullshit articles that he sent me, the studies proving his point. You know, like the Oxford study proving, you know, bullshit. The study proving that you know, natural immunity is not as good as the vaccine. You know, these are fucking people trained in science, right? And here is a fucking dropout, college dropout, you know, challenging that narrative. Of course, I'm the idiot, right? I am the idiot. My mom is the idiot. My mom who talks about the rebranding of the flu. You know, like that's what she says. This is essentially the flu. And my mom talks about how my grandpa died from the flu. No, but my mom is the idiot. My mom is the conspiration of theorists. And you know, and like again, like the entire system, the people that are validated the most, right? Because they have a college degree or work in some industry, they are the ones pushing all this madness. And how do you challenge their authority? You know, it's just I don't know. I'm just ranting. It's just looking back. It's just so insane, and I'm just crazy screaming. And you know, and like there's at this point I don't even talk about the vaccine. I'm done. Like either you see it or you don't. Like I don't. Like I'm shifting my arguments to like the economics of all this crap. Because if you don't see what's happened, you know, these are the arguments. There is evidence for that. You know, I guess, you know, this whole vaccine thing, whatever, debatable, and the data is really like held by, you know, fucking Pfizer, who doesn't want to release it for 70 years, and no one questioned that shit. But again, I'm talking about the economy. Look at it. You've been robbed. We've been robbed. Like, no, don't thank them. Fuck them. Like, they gave you crumbs in order to take the whole goddamn cake. You know, and so that's why I'm like wondering, like how else do we try to reach anybody? Because again, I don't know, like I'm beat. I can't, like I just don't have any more arguments to make with anybody who doesn't want to listen. And I feel like now there's just clans. You know, either you're with one or the other. There's like we're back to the right wing, left wing bullshit.
Top versus bottom. Yeah, I think a lot of these people too, like they kind of think of themselves as passive to a degree, but I just find it increasingly difficult to extend patience. Like it's been 2 years. It's like you're either show solidarity with the working class, with the people, or you don't. Like you have to make a choice. And it seems like a lot of these people they've made that choice, but they don't recognize it. Like they don't see it that way. But I mean, where's your fucking solidarity? Like I just want to shake people still. Especially as they scream about like equity and all of this to the sky.
I think solidarity is in the vaccine to them. Like,
yeah.
And that's my thing, because that's why I'm trying to bring it back to like the fundamental arguments about capitalism. Do we understand, what it does, what it does, how it evolves, its evolutionary process, its limitations, right? Its contradictions, and how those things are playing out, and why do they need to do this stuff? Like I don't come from a moralistic standpoint necessarily. Like obviously, like respect life, whatever. But it's just that they just have to do this at this point. Like this is not just for being evil. There is an economic argument as to why they have to do this. And so that's what I'm trying to bring it back to. There is no other way for them, because they've reached them, like the limits of their system as it's been running. So it has to evolve. And we're in that process of evolution, the fourth industrial revolution.
Well, I think the question you asked about, well, how are we going to make headway on this, or how do you deal with this wall, this brick wall of unreason and arrogance and security in their sucking up to power and into the apparatus, the state apparatus and the corporate apparatus, and the security that offers this layer. And I think, Kenny, that's not really the layer we're fighting against. Like that's a section of the either middle class or even sections of working class that have just, bought a capitalist narrative and are going to be used as foot soldiers, ideological foot soldiers. Because a lot of these people in an actual fight, I think they'd be like, nah, no, bring the police in. I don't want to get my hands dirty. I do come back to Ottawa to think, when I think about the truckers who occupied, they didn't say we're making an argument. They had a point. They were doing it for a reason, but they said, we're going to go to Ottawa and occupy Ottawa, and then let's have this discussion. So I do think it's going to be an action and a collective action of resistance to something that will allow us to get a hearing. But I don't think it will be it's not a reasoning. It is a fight ultimately that is going to have to be had. And there is ultimately no reasoning with the position that is on the other side, because they're lying about their reasons. So of course you can't argue with their thing, because it makes no sense, because it's not really what they're doing. What they're really doing is about wealth transfer, is about profits, is about building a surveillance and data infrastructure that secures that profit future, even more so under a regime where it seemed previously very much at risk. So that's what I see going on, and that's what I see the left cheerleading, and that's what I see many people who think that this is about safety from COVID, and therefore we need to be vaccinated, basically saying, okay, go do this, because they have no idea. Like they're looking at that one thing, and the other thing is what's happening. So I think you're right, Kenny, to try to change the conversation, but ultimately, I feel like Ottawa proves that it's not, and the Indian farmers prove it's not something we're going to win by argumentation, although discussion is going to be part of us getting people to our side. It's at some point we'll have to figure out a way of gathering enough people at a place where our occupation or where our presence is a real problem for the other side, and then they're going to have to threaten us with taking away our income. Shit like that. That's what's going to happen.
I just want to say that I don't mean to have an argument with like the ruling class, right? but I think us are gonna have to understand things differently, right? And I think that's where probably people like us come into like, I don't think we can stop this shit from taking steps forward, right? Like we talked in the last, I don't think it will fully materialize, but if it takes step forward, it's gonna create massive ripples. And so at this point, what I see is like people that have been brought into this, that probably started just resisting, but they've learned about digital ID, they've learned about, the COVID passes, the vaccine, all these relationships, right? Blockchain and the Internet of Things. We are gonna have to have an answer when shit starts happening. Like when people don't understand some shit that's happened, and that's what I wonder. Because like we will have to understand things differently. We've talked about that. Like one thing is to resist, another one is to push back. And I do think personally that to push back, we're gonna have to understand what we're fighting, right? It's not just like this short term thing. It's a massive evolution of a monster. And so that's why I think it's a conversation among us. The people who are willing to resist and push back. And and obviously we need more friends. And hopefully that's where the answers come in, right? When people have questions about what the hell is happening to their personal lives, probably, it's having that explanation that makes sense, more sense than the other bullshit that, like leaves them with a lot of contradictions.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I think about, I'm obviously concerned for our well-being in the coming days, months, years. But since this is such a long-term project, they set these things out, whatever, Agenda 2020, Agenda 2030, they're thinking in decades a lot of the time. Is just the capture of the youth and how it feels like in the long term there's going to be fewer and fewer of us. Because even if they dropped all mandates everywhere today, I still think just the psychological damage that they've done to children and young people, it's going to take years and years to undo. And so it really concerns me thinking about like who's going to be in charge in 15 years. Like in my, if I have children, my children's generation, like what is that going to look like? And how, like you said, we need more friends, but I feel like we're going to go the other way. Like we're going to be the old like Luddites that are just, best case scenario, just kind of like boxed out of the system. And obviously worst case scenario could look like a lot of bad stuff. But yeah, I'm not feeling super optimistic. Like I know, Andy, you said there's gonna have to be a fight. Like, do you think there will be?
Yes, but it does matter what lessons it draws. Like in Ottawa there was a fight, and I think people have drawn some lessons, and I think people learned something about the state, and I think other people did, and that's meaningful, even in the context of what I would call a defeat. But there will have to be. I just don't know. I'm not seeing it around me right now. And will there be? There will be, but will it be enough? Will we learn the lessons out of that? Because we're not going to win the first time. Like, will we learn the lessons? I don't know. I'm pessimistic on the future. I think I'm betting if I had a bunch of money and I was on a spaceship, I'm putting almost all my money on World War III, on everything going down. That's what I think is the outcome. And our future, I agree with you, Jessica. I'm concerned about the future of the generation coming up. And I think that future is there for people like Miles Hagopian.
Yeah. Yeah, it's also, there's a lot of people in the US who have been living relatively normal this whole time. I just had a friend pass through from Arizona heading to Seattle, and he said it's completely normal there. Like kids aren't really wearing masks. I have another friend who's visiting Idaho right now, where I am, like outside the schools and the healthcare places. It's pretty normal. And I mean, I'm glad not everywhere is like San Francisco and Seattle, of course. But I suppose also, if you're doing fine, you're not gonna put your head on the chopping block, right? So we'll have to see in terms of how sort of quickly the enclosure moves in terms of like those sorts of populations.
Yeah. And like you said, Jessica, if you drop all the mandates, all this stuff, like I have a coworker who's 17. He's like first job, and he talks to me he confides in me, and he showed me his grades the other day, and he already has a platform with all his information. Like a digital platform, and so that shit is been here. It's already here. That shit that we're talking about, that young kids, and then like 2 days later, my coworker who's like 24 and doesn't engage in any of this political stuff. He's an artist. He was talking to customers and checking for the vaccination because they had to, mandate. And the customers were mid-20s as well, and they were annoyed at why we didn't have digital IDs in our wallets in our iPhones. And so, yeah, it's scary. Like, we're probably those old people that are just, because I don't know if there's like, I don't know what the sense is in young people, because ultimately is, like you said, they factor us out of it. But I don't think there's much sense of like, what's the big deal with this? It's already been in their lives.
I did have one positive experience. I agree, but I did have one positive experience yesterday with one of my classes. We had an event, discussion event in the library at our university. And I think I told you guys in the last episode, or when we were talking to Allison, that my library is one of many libraries in the country who have recently purchased a whole bunch of VR headsets. And they're doing all these like cool, whatever, history exhibits and stuff. And the librarians had like set up the VR so that we could look at the town that the novel we were discussing was based on, and like walk down the street or whatever. And so we did the event, and then we wrapped up, and the librarians were like there, like clearly sort of like waiting, and they had prepared and everything. And so I sort of said, and they said, like, if anyone wants to check out the VR stuff, like go for it. And only one student was willing to put it on. A lot of them said they had it like on the, how you can have it on the screen. So you're kind of like, you're not watching it in virtual reality, but you're watching what they're watching. And a lot of them were just like, oh, like this just makes me feel sick. And one kid goes, I fucking hate Zuckerberg, and just marches out. And I was like, all right, maybe there's hope. Maybe there's hope. But those are my best students. So I don't know that they're representative, but
yeah, you've got to their brains already.
Yeah.
You messed with them. That is that is what we have to hope is there. My brother also believes, he's in Texas, he believes there is a underbelly of massive anger at people who have been who've taken the shot, maybe even taken a second shot or a third, and did it without really agreeing to it. And he believes that if it does turn out that people are getting sicker, he says those people are not going to buy the statement of, oh, that's something else. That's you said it, your reason for a heart attack is you're setting your alarm too early, or because of global warming, or because, well, young people just get heart attacks now. And he thinks that, things like that, like some of the health problems that people develop, he thinks are going to turn into something else. I hope he's right, but I'm not sure.
Yeah. I also, the whole HIV thing, I don't know, maybe at some point we'll have to talk about that, but it's a lot of fear mongering there. And I wonder if they're going to pull out some whatever vaccine or something's going on with that. There's going to be a lot of just health fear mongering and control of people's bodies, I think, coming down the line, like COVID or no COVID.
Yep. I guess, Kenny, is there anything else from you or Jessica?
Hopefully we'll be more peppy next week when Eduardo gets back.
You can save our show. We're so depressed now. No, well, yeah. I mean, it's I think that the impact of what happened in Ottawa, my buoyed spirits are, it goes both ways. So I feel the effect of what they've been able to do there.
Yeah, and they were really, I mean, Canada was not pushing back at all, and that moved really fast, and they mobilized a lot of people. And I mean, I know a lot of them have been, pushed out, and they've got checkpoints all over the city, and they were arresting people with no bail and stuff. But I don't know. I mean, from what I hear, some of them are regrouping, and they're not just like giving up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I'm betting on the people that are not vaccinated in the global south to raising hell, because again, we're focusing on the global north, who's by and large push this narrative and these mandates and these forceful shit. Not that it's not happening out there, right? And there is no levels of it's got into people's head, but again, historically too, I don't know, I guess I tried to leave this country once before, and at the time I didn't think the ship was sinking. I remember we had this conversation with Lipson, but now it's like, this shit's scary. Like it's just scary to be surrounded by this stuff. But we'll see.
On the positive note, it looks like Iceland is opening itself up, which means that was our honeymoon destination that looked foreclosed to us. So now we might be able to get there. So I think everything's looking roses now.
What are we talking about, right? That's difficult for us.
So we'll see. We'll see if we can pull it off. All right. Well, Kenny, thanks for the idea, and I'm actually glad we discussed this because it got me thinking. All right. That does it for this week's episode. What's Left is a weekly political podcast channel challenging the mainstream left. We post information about our topics and our guests on the episode notes wherever you found this episode, or on our blog at what-s-left.webnode.com. You can find past episodes to this podcast there and connect with us. I remind people, if you like anything you hear, please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications to any of our 9 platforms: Spotify, iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, Bitchute, Odysee, YouTube, Telegram, or Rumble. If you'd like to give us feedback about something you've heard or suggest something for us to cover, contact us through our blog. So until then, Jessica, thanks once again. Kenny, great job, good subject. And I guess we'll be back next week.
Bye, guys.